Hi, everyone, and we're back at Beercon 2, Rise of the Rookie, and I am absolutely delighted to introduce Rae Jeffries Harris, who is a content developer for Immersive Labs. And so she is a lady with a completely devious mind that tortures people that try to hack her stuff. So with no further ado, Rae, over to you.
Hi, I'm Rae, and I'm going to talk about hackers who had no intention of being malicious, but you probably guessed that from the title. First, I'd like to pose a question to you. Who came first, white hat hackers or black hat hackers? The question is probably about as fair as asking whether the chicken or the egg came first. You can argue either side, but at the end of the day, you'll still be able to make a meal out of it. The logical thought process would be to think that malicious hackers came first, and that the valiant ethical hackers rose up to defend against them. But there were people warning about security vulnerabilities long before they were ever exploited. Would they not count as ethical hackers in today's climate? The next question is, who gets the most attention? Now, that is much easier. Headline news is unlikely to ever be ethical hackers. It's always the hacks that scared us, the hacks that threatened us in some way, shape, or form, the WannaCries of the world. Unfortunately, this means that the general public have a very skewed view on what hacking is. But the good news is there is another kind of hacker who will, on occasion, make headlines. Now, this type of hacker isn't good, but they're not bad either. You would call them a grey hat hacker. Returning to my original question of who came first, malicious hackers or ethical hackers, I would like to make an argument for neither. Allow me to explain. We often think of computer viruses as being malicious and destructive, but at the dawn of malware, back when viruses were spread between machines on floppy disk, this just wasn't the case. In fact, they were usually harmless. They would often play music or animations for you, or have an amusing message, like this one, which would infect your computer, then display terminate a message. Don't be afraid, I am a very kind virus. You have too many works today, so I will let your computer slow down. Have a nice day. Goodbye. Press a key to continue. This isn't an isolated example. The first virus to hit MS-DOS was designed to be harmless. It even had the phone numbers of the creators displayed so that you could ring them for help removing the virus. The Morris worm, released in 1988, took down approximately 10% of the internet in its time, but it had no intention of causing harm. Robert Morris simply wanted to know how big the internet was and tried to notify people of a fix as soon as he realized how catastrophic the code he'd released was. The first worm to spread by email was described by the author as a sympathetic hitchhiker who uses your internet connection to travel and thanks you with a small animation. Of course, there were malicious hacks interspersed, but mostly hacks were just, well, hacks. They weren't good or bad. Someone was curious about how far they could get their virus to travel, was curious about what boundaries they could push, or maybe just wanted to make their machine behave a little differently. Because hacking at its core is just prodding a machine to see how it works and to see how you can make it work for you. Which brings us on to one of my favorite hackers, Sami Kamkar. See, Sami was good at making computers work for him. When he was younger, he really enjoyed playing the video game Counter-Strike. It's a first-person shooter game, but he was a curious kid and began to wonder how much of the gameplay he had control over. What had the developers made client-side that he could use? So he started working out ways to hack the game. Not much, just enough to give himself a slight advantage. He'd often share these cheap bits of code around, and the developers would inevitably end up fixing the vulnerabilities. So Sami would find a way around the fix. It became more of a game than the video game itself. Sami finding vulnerabilities and the developers updating the game code to fix the vulnerability. If we fast forward a couple of years to 2005, and I hope you'll excuse me if I digress for a second, but for those who are less familiar with web development, I'm going to do a quick intro here into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Broadly speaking, websites use 3 different programming languages to produce their user experience: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML is for adding meaning to raw content by marking it up. CSS is for formatting that marked up content, and JavaScript is for making that content and formatting interactive. For example, this HTML marks the text, "This is a paragraph," as a paragraph, which is shown by the p tag. You can then add CSS to style the HTML. The style tag we've used here sets all paragraphs to use a font size of 32 pixels and to be the color blue. Then we add JavaScript to make it interactive. The code you can see on the screen adds an event listener to our paragraph so that if the paragraph is clicked, the text will change to "you clicked it." So we click the text and it changed to "you clicked it." So hopefully this gives you a good idea of what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are used for. It's also worth noting that this entire script can be rewritten to achieve the same effect. The style has been moved into the paragraph tag, and the JavaScript is now run by the onClick attribute. This produces exactly the same result that we saw before. So, back to Sammy, 2005. Sammy is now 19. Now, at the time, MySpace was the biggest site on the internet, bigger than Google, which is quite frankly astounding considering it looked like this. It was a social networking site, one that you could personalize by adding CSS to style your page however you liked. If you have a look at the music input field here, you can see some HTML tags which make it look like this on my profile. Now, Sammy thought this was pretty neat, but he wondered how he could make his page stand out. And remember, he's built up some mad hacking skills from hacking video games. So he started looking at the restrictions MySpace had. He realized that there was a limit of 12 pictures that you were allowed to have on your profile. So he thought it would be quite funny if he just added a 13th. It was a small change, no one would really notice, but it was subtle and it amused him. Now, the number of photos was set by client-side validation, so he could easily bypass this and make requests directly to the server, submit as many photos as he liked. He started wondering what else he could do. Now, the MySpace profile had the option to set a relationship status. You could choose from options like single, in a relationship, married, but you couldn't set it to whatever you wanted. Sammy wanted to update his to be in a hot relationship. Again, a funny yet subtle change. But unlike the photo upload, he didn't have any sort of access to whatever code set the relationship status. And he couldn't do this using CSS. He needed some way of adding JavaScript to his page in order to do this. A little script like this would do the trick. Now, MySpace pretty much blocked JavaScript in every single way. In fact, the only HTML tags allowed, as far as Sammy could tell, were link tags, image tags, and div tags. It stripped out script tags, body tags, onClick attribute, on anything, href, you get the idea. Anything useful was not allowed. MySpace had done a reasonable job of protecting against cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. Of course, Sammy would need such a vulnerability if he wanted to put JavaScript on his profile. Now, as I've mentioned, MySpace lets users style their page using CSS. So Sammy began looking at the browser to see if he could exploit the interpretation of CSS tags. Now, remember that CSS is for styling the page, setting things like the color and the size. However, at the time, some browsers, Internet Explorer and several versions of Safari, allowed JavaScript to be written in CSS tags. So this code would be executed in the browser to bring up an alert box. Now, he wanted to change his relationship status to be in a hot relationship, so he was going to need to be able to put text in this alert box, which means he needs to use quotations. Currently, he can't do that because he's using both single and double quotations. But this is easily fixed. He can either escape quotations or he can use an expression to store the JavaScript and execute it by name, like so. And if we run it in the browser, awesome, we have text. Cool. Unfortunately, MySpace is one step ahead of him, and they strip out the word JavaScript from, well, everywhere. However, some browsers will interpret Java \n script, that's Java new line script, as JavaScript. Bingo, MySpace now accepts it. And if we look at Sammy's profile, you get the following message on it. It's worth noting as well that though the code is on Sammy's profile, and anyone who views his profile will run the code in their browser, the code itself is only visible if you look for it in their HTML. Sammy's profile would look normal, bar the weird alert that pops up whenever you view it. Now, to change his relationship status, Sammy was going to need to change the inner text or inner HTML on the page. Unfortunately, MySpace is one step ahead of him again and strips out either function. But that's all right. Sammy can use an eval function and evaluate two strings to form inner HTML, like so. This brings up an alert box with all of the HTML within the body of the page. Fab. That means we have everything that we need to update the relationship status. So if we take the code we want to write and we convert it into the code that we're allowed to write, it becomes something like this. And if we grab the code and head on over to my beautiful 2005 MySpace profile, so you can click the profile and you can scroll down to see that currently it has a status of in a relationship. And if we go up to edit the profile, and I'm going to add the code in the About Me section. So save that, view the profile, and if we scroll down, you should be able to see that it has been updated to in a hot relationship, rightfully so. And if we open the code in a new tab and search for the About Me section, we should be able to see our code just there. Yeah. Cool. But what did that mean? Well, he had found a way to execute JavaScript on his profile page. That meant anyone who visited his profile page would run the JavaScript in their browser. What's the point of having a 13th picture and a status of being in a hot relationship if no one sees it? So he wondered if he could make anyone who visited his page automatically add him as a friend. And he could. And if he can control their browser, could he update their own profile? Again, yes. He wanted to do something funny. So now whenever someone visited his page, they would automatically add him as a friend, and at the bottom of their profile write, "But most of all, Sammy is my hero." Sammy releases the code. A few days go by. Not many of his friends have hit it. Not many people have visited his page. He wants it to spread a little faster. So how about when someone visits his page, they add him as a friend, they update their profile with, "But most of all, Sammy is my hero," and then copy the code to their profile. This means that if anyone looks at their profile, they would add Sammy as a friend, update their profile, and add the JavaScript to their page. Hopefully, you get the idea. Here's a quote I particularly like from Sammy. "Within my friend group, it should probably hit them all within a week or so, and that'll be pretty funny. Someone will complain, it will get taken down, no big deal." Sammy releases the new and improved code and then goes to sleep, hoping to wake up to a few more friends. He wakes up to 10,000 new friends. Sammy has just created a MySpace worm. In fact, Sammy has created the fastest spreading virus in history. Within 20 hours, over 1 million users have run his payload. Within 24 hours, the whole site goes down. Now, this hack was not meant to be malicious. To quote Sammy, it was done in the interest of interest. It was interesting and fun. Impressive when you consider that this is what the final version of the code looked like. I highly recommend checking out some of the work Sammy has done since then, particularly Evercookie, which the NSA have used as a method of tracking Tor users. Now, moving away from Sammy, a surprisingly similar hack happened on Twitter in 2014. The self-retweeting tweet. Now, this hack was similar to Sammy's in that it exploited a cross-site scripting vulnerability, but this was much simpler than the hoops that Sammy had to jump through to spread his worm. Essentially, the script set a class as XSS. It would then look for anything with the class XSS, which would return the script. Then it would find the parents and select the parent containing the retweet button, which is this box. Following that, it would then find the retweet button and click it. Then it would click to confirm that it wants to retweet. And then finally, you have the payload, which is an alert box saying XSS in TweetDeck. Anyone viewing the message would just see a little heart and a pop-up message saying XSS in TweetDeck, whilst their browser retweeted the tweet for them. As a result, 83,000 Twitter users retweeted the script, and Twitter quickly released an update to fix it. Again, a self-replicating worm, again, does not appear to have any malicious intent. In fact, it goes out of its way to inform users that there's a vulnerability on the platform. Which brings us to the final hack I'm going to talk about today. At Hacker Giraffe in 2018 hacked 48,000 messages, 48,000 printers to print out the following message. PewDiePie is in trouble and needs your help to defeat T-Series. It goes on to explain what's going on, and at the bottom you have a little postscript saying, pro tip, your printer is exposed to the internet. Please fix that. Greetings from a friendly giraffe. Now, this was an incredibly simple hack. He obtained a list of vulnerable printers from Shodan, a search engine for internet-connected devices. Then he used PRET, the printer exploitation toolkit, to connect to each printer and print out the TXT file. There wasn't really any need to hack anything. The printers were exposed as they weren't sitting behind a firewall. You can just send commands directly to them. In the hacker's own words, I killed two birds with one stone, raised awareness for this issue, and helped PewDiePie get a slight edge. All the aforementioned hacks had no malicious intent, but they all got a lot of attention. And that's surely one of the best things you can ask for, because the general public is not clued up on cybersecurity. Case in point, when the Morris worm was first released in 1988, a legitimate reporter rang up to ask whether the virus could spread to infect human bodies. I'd like to take a moment to assure you all that you are not at risk from the Morris worm. The source code is well contained in a secure location and is well removed from the general public. It's at the Computer History Museum in California. Jokes aside, hacks like these get noticed and have on numerous occasions mitigated or even prevented damage from future malicious hacks that work on the same principles. Moreover, they give less technical folk an insight into hacking that's approachable. They don't aim to scare users, and as a result, they provide much better opportunities for growth and learning than, say, this. So remember that amongst all the hacktivists, criminals, spies, there are curious hackers who aim to surprise. And that's all, folks.
Wow, just absolutely brilliant. I certainly enjoyed that. Rhea, one question, of course, leaps to my mind is that poking at MySpace, a very old platform. Modern day, though, when you see these types of stuff, are things like Facebook and LinkedIn and more secure as, you know, a result of those kind of experimentations, or is it just sort of continues to be a complete free-for-all?
It's sort of a mix. So for the most part, I'd say they're probably a lot better. But at the same time, 2014, the self-retweeting tweet, that was something that should not have been able to happen. And that was just basic, not even checking that there was a script tag. You don't get quite as many sort of that blow up quite that much, but I don't know whether that's just because it's normally when companies are more establishing themselves that these are more likely to happen. So I don't know whether it's that we've just not yet heard about the next thing that's a disaster waiting to, well, not a disaster, but they're always quite good fun.
Certainly, I guess Sammy could have made a lot of money if there was a bug bounty program in effect for MySpace and later on. Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do we have any questions from our audience?
So I haven't seen anything from Twitch, but I do have a question myself. So one of the perceptions is hackers are bad and they're these evil people are out to do evil things and that. How do we change that perception? Because obviously, clearly, that's not always the intent of hackers. Hackers can sometimes be good people. So how can we change that in the industry? Well, what are your views on changing the industry perception around that?
Honestly, I think it's helpful having people like these who are kind of just curious and probably take things a little bit too far, because normally it's really funny and things that get noticed are normally either scary or amusing. So if you want them to get noticed without like hackers who are terrifying and live in basements in Korea, then you probably want to find something that you can show people that amuses them, because that's far more likely to get their attention than just saying, you've got a vulnerability, this needs fixing. I'll go with that.
Great answer. I totally agree with that. That's kind of what the Beer Farm is all about, bringing in a bit of humor and hopefully raising that awareness. And totally agree with humor being a big part of that.
Yeah. I just want to make a comment, Ray, if that's okay. A lot of people have commented in the Twitch that it's been a great trip down memory lane and, you know, back to times gone by and all that kind of thing. But actually, what was super cool about your talk was that it wasn't just a nostalgia trip. It was a dive into the anatomy of what actually happened during these things. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, back then, you know, MySpace got done by a guy who was a nice guy actually and all that kind of stuff. What you took us through was the reality of it and how it happened. And then again, the same with Twitter in 2014. So full credit to you for, you know, knowing the subject inside out. I just wanted to say that. So brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have to agree. The comments are absolutely brilliant. There is one question from Twitch, but before we get onto that, I just kind of wanted to echo Mike's comments again. Just go, it is a really, really nice trip down memory lane, but with added context and like added descriptions and all that kind of stuff. It was great. I think I was one of the people that get hit by the Sammy worm, and very confused for a very long time. Who is this guy and why is my profile updated? But Mick LeBraid asks, which one was your favorite of all these stories? Which one really captivated you and drew you in?
Definitely Sammy. But that's largely because he's quite an interesting person in general. And I like the fact that you can go through his process and sort of see that he never sort of like, don't get me wrong, he knew he was hacking the site, but it was always, oh, if I can do this, can I do this? And that would be cool and fun. It was never a, haha, I have full control, I can take over. It was all just really quite silly. And I don't know, it's always quite interesting to listen to interviews with him, because he always talks about afterwards just sort of realizing that he'd crashed the site and just being there like, oh shoot, I should not have done that, which I don't know, I find it quite interesting.
It's almost like the whole idea of crime, isn't it? The MMO, as they call it in law enforcement circles. And in the middle M, or the second M, in Sammy's case, the motivation wasn't really anything malicious, as you described. It was more around, how can I make this do something a bit weird and not take the site down, which ultimately did happen. But the motive wasn't to take down Facebook, beg your pardon, take down MySpace at the time. It was just, can I do this? And yeah, somebody commented, I don't know whether you've got a view on this, Ray, but I think somebody made a comment about him getting arrested and sent to jail. Did that happen?
No, so the FBI did come and raid his home, and I think he got, it was either 1 or 2 years with a lot of community service, so something like 2,000 hours community service. And I think at the time he did get a lifetime ban on ever using the internet, but he also, I think it was after 1 or 2 years, they were like, yeah, your behavior has been absolutely perfect since then.
Yeah.
Go ahead, go use the internet, please don't do something like that again.
And then ultimately the
He'll be
National
banned
Security
from
Agency
workspace.
start using his software.
Yeah. Really interesting, you know, and I want to pivot on that one, because it's like nowadays the climate for what something like Sammy did would I think go in a totally different direction. It seems like, you know, the idea of sort of the fun and the pointing out, you know, in kind of a humorous way that there's a problem, but now, you know, it feels like the law enforcement community, especially in the United States, would just like absolutely crush the person, and it sort of it sends a bit of a chill, I think, towards the security research community, where you know, what your intent is, you know, obviously, you know, when folks drop proof of concepts on the internet, you know, Ray, do you have maybe a sense of, you know, things like responsible disclosure and bug bounties? Where do you sit on that issue?
I think those are really helpful, to be honest. There was another guy, I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he was also hacking when he was younger, like Sammy, but unlike Sammy, he got into quite a lot of trouble for it. Ended up I think he got sent to prison a number of times. And on one of the occasions, the judge said, if I see you here again, you'll get a life sentence. At which point he was like, okay, I really need to stop hacking. And then he found bug bounty programs and found that he could hack legally and get paid for it. And that was pretty much a lifesaver for him, because he was very addicted to hacking and still is, I believe. So don't get me wrong, I think those are good. I also, I don't think people who hack and clearly don't mean to cause harm, I don't think that they should be treated like criminals, because I mean, everyone's got to learn somehow, and got to break a few eggs to make an omelette.
So for me, hacking has always been about that inquisitive perception, finding out how something works, tinkering with it, figuring it out. Do you think that's maybe why those with that kind of sort of mindset make great hackers, and why like they just persevere on that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, it's why I had the section on hacking at the beginning, because it would just be people wanting to see how far their virus could go. There was one guy who, I think his virus got put on the Malware Museum. Don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's quite fun to go and look at, because you get to see really old viruses, and like they're mostly just fun animation type things. And when interviewed and asked why he'd ages ago written all these viruses, it was just that he found it really cool that he'd managed to get it halfway across the world when he was in this little remote village with not that much contact with other people. And mostly it's just people, at least to begin with, it was definitely just people curious about what they could do more than anything else.
Super. Well, Ray, that is time. Perfect
Cool.
timing. Yep, all good. On behalf of the Beer Farmers and all the friends and family of the band and everybody involved and the people watching and listening, just want to say thank you very much.
Brilliant
Brilliant.
talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.